but Andrew Wiggins, who heads up their public policy, he's going to give a brief presentation today. He's going to talk about the different amendments that the Florida Chamber of Commerce has vetted and they're involved with. I do send apologies from Sherry. Sherry, our chair for this committee, she's not feeling well this morning, can't attend, but the show goes on. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Wiggins.
Thank you very much. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to people about elections, about amendments, about things that matter to our state, because these things are what keep us, what we found is groups have turned our constitutional amendment process into a way to change policy without changing through legislative procedures. Groups have found that it's much more cost effective, believe it or not, to spend tens of millions of dollars to get something switched in an election than it would to get it passed during a legislative session and taking the time to actually put in the work to get it passed. So what I want to do today is sort of take a look at what we see on the ballot this year in 2020. There are 4 amendments that, if you look at that first slide, that were put on by citizens groups. And whenever I tell someone that it's a citizens amendment, it's really not. These amendments are ones that are put on by special interest groups or groups that have interest in changing the Constitution. Because quite frankly, if you look at the column to the right, it takes a great deal of money to even put an amendment on the ballot. These dollar figures are before one piece of communication's been made in an election to educate voters pro on the amendment, because these are the groups that are pushing them. But you just see that, like for instance, the citizenship requirement to vote in Florida elections has raised over $8 million through either in-kind donations or through actual fundraising, which most of this is used to hire the petition gatherers that you'll see in parking lots around the state, meeting your local community outside of a Publix or a Walmart, urging people to sign a constitutional amendment to, make sure that people are citizens in Florida. Quite frankly, you have to be a citizen in Florida to vote right now, but this amendment will change one word, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you see that the First Amendment citizenship has raised $8.2 million. Raising Florida's minimum wage has raised $5.2 million. The All Voters Vote Amendment, which they're describing it as an open primary, but it's really a jumbled primary or where everyone runs at the same time together. That's raised over $7 million, mostly from one donor. And then voter approval of constitutional amendments has raised over $9 million, and mostly in-kind contributions to help get it on the ballot. 5 and 6 were ones put on by the legislature. One's a limitation on homestead exemption, and the other's a tax discount for the surviving spouses of deceased veterans who had permanent combat injuries. Like I said, we'll talk about all these in a minute. If you want to flip the slide to the next one, we can sort of just talk through it. And as we get through it, I want everyone to feel like you can ask questions as we get through the process, and sort of, we can talk about these amendments. This first one is the decision requirement to vote in Florida. When you read through the ballot title in the process, what we have here is we're changing the Constitution by just one word. Right now, the Constitution reads, every citizen can vote. This amendment would change it to only a citizen can vote. So there's a fear among some groups that if courts move a little bit more, let's say, to the progressive side, that the citizenship requirement could possibly be weakened, and so they see this as a way to strengthen it. This is one that it really changes and doesn't change a lot in the Constitution, but it's on the ballot. They really want it on the ballot, and a lot of these are put on the ballot because it's a presidential year. Some of them are used as turnout gimmicks. It'll rile up people on the right, like this one might, or it might rile up people on the left. So this is sort of a quick, it doesn't really do a whole lot. Like I said, it would have to be due at the constitutional level, because this is in one of our articles of the Constitution when we describe what an elector is or a voter is. So that's what Amendment 1 is. Amendment 2 is one that many have heard. It's one that we're taking an active role in opposing because we think it's bad for Florida and bad for our economy. But what it would do, it would raise Florida's minimum wage to $10 an hour starting next September of 2021. and each year thereafter, it would raise the minimum wage by $1 up until 2026. Then after that, the minimum wage would be affected by inflation. So, the minimum wage wouldn't stop at $15 an hour. It would just keep going. This would make Florida the first state in the country with $15 minimum wage in our Constitution, the only state. Most others have done it statutorily. This would be actually in our Constitution, meaning it could not be changed unless the voters put a constitutional amendment in to change that. So, as we know, the side that sees it believes that there's a living wage that people need, and it would help the people that are in poverty. Those of us who are opposing the amendment sort of see this as a cost prohibitor and, quite frankly, hurting people in poverty because it would discourage people going back to school for more training. It has other things from social programs, the safety net that people have, or it could be for child care, food stamps, things like that. When the wage rises, unless the federal law would change to meet the rise, it would disqualify some from getting aid. Moving on to the next amendment, Amendment 3, is the one that they're classifying as the open primary. It's the all voters vote amendment. Right now in Florida, we have what is called a closed primary system, meaning when there's a primary, Republicans can vote for Republicans, Democrats can vote for Democrats. If you're not a Republican or a Democrat, you can't vote in the primaries to select who the Republican or Democratic nominee is. So what this amendment would do is it would allow all voters to vote in a primary, but it would be what we call a jumbled primary. So when I would walk in to vote for governor, let's say it was in 2018, my choices would have been Ron DeSantis, Adam Putnam on the Republican side, as well as Gwen Graham, Andrew Gillum, and Chris King, and Phil Levine, all the Democrats at the same time, and only the top two vote finishers would move on to the general election. It's the idea by the group that's pushing it is this would allow the MPAs, which are they're roughly about 27% of our electorate right now, the ability to vote in a primary election, which right now they can't vote. They can only vote for nonpartisan races or open primaries if there's not a Republican, if there's only Democrats running, or Republicans without write-ins that close it. So they see this as a way to open the process. Others who oppose it see it as a way to really it would be changing the Constitution for not a lot of difference. We've seen in other states where this has happened because the groups who support it believe this would moderate candidates. If we look at the states that have this in their Constitution right now, which would be Louisiana or California or Washington State, we haven't seen a lot of moderating of the candidates. So, but this is what the group that's pushing it wants it to do. So that's what it's technically they're calling it an open primary, but it's not really. But honestly, if you look at 2018 in the governor's race, it's only the top two vote getters would have advanced, and it's a little specious argument because you had Republicans who voted for Republicans who might have voted for Gwen Graham, Republican women or independent women, but what we know is that the two candidates for governor in 2018 would have been Ron DeSantis and Adam Putnam. So it has the ability to stop a party. But, in an overwhelming Republican area or overwhelming Democratic area, the two candidates for the general election could only be Democrats or only be Republicans. So it jumbles the primary and it opens up, but also it does have the potential to leave a party out. We've also seen in recent days where the League of Women Voters and the Black Caucus within the legislature come out in opposition because of their fear of what this could do to minority representation. But that's just sort of a brief look at what the voter approval of the all voters vote would do. Amendment 4 is the last one that is put on by a citizens group. This is put on a group called Keep Our Constitution Clean, who've become growingly concerned with the number of the amendments that we're putting in our Constitution. The U.S. Constitution since 1789 has put in 27 amendments. Florida's Constitution since 1967 has put in hundreds of amendments. So there's a fear that we even have an amendment in our Constitution that protects pregnant pigs from the kind of care they receive. So it's one that groups have become more, interested in protecting our Constitution. This amendment would require that every amendment would have to pass in 2 election cycles consecutively. So if an amendment was on the ballot in 2020 and it passed with 60% of the vote, it would then have to go onto the ballot again in 2022 and pass as well before it would become law. This has happened in other states like Nevada, where, and they've seen a lot of the number of constitutional amendments passed, limited. Good policy still gets through, and it's not a, we see progressive policy get through as well as more conservative policy at this level with having passed twice, but it makes the public have a general consensus that it's not just for one election cycle. Then we move on to Amendment 5, which is one put on the legislature that we're not taking a position on. This was put on earlier this year. And what it would do is it would extend the Save Our Homes benefits from when you sell your house, or the portability as we call it. If you sold your house right now, you only have 2 years to transfer it to a new purchase. This would add 1 more year to it to make it be 3 years. So it's, this is an amendment that won't really have much communication for. You won't hear a lot about it, but it was one that was put on. And then finally, Amendment 6 was the legislature put on allowing a homestead property tax discount for the surviving spouses of a combat wounded veteran, who suffered a permanent combat-related injury. So this would give them a little bit more of a tax break, something they already were receiving, but if their spouse died, they would, under current law, they would lose that benefit. This just would keep that benefit in place after the spouse's death. So moving on to the next slide, I just kind of want to show you just the success rate. If you put a ballot on the Constitution, an amendment on the ballot in Florida, right now it used to be voters, getting amendment through was tougher. Now we find, like, if we look at what happened in the last election, 8 of 11 passed in 2018, and it's just there's a general proclivity for voters just to vote yes. Some of it's voter fatigue. We have an extremely long ballot here in Florida. This year it's we've got president, we've got congressional races, state house, state senate. We've got county commission, city. You go through the gambit of what will be on the ballot. Once you get to 6 amendments, which are down at the at the bottom of the ballot, there's a lot of fatigue, and we've seen in many years the number of votes cast for, let's say, president, compared to what the amendments are. We'll find attrition of 1 million to 1.5 million voters who fall off from voting for president to voting for the amendment. So it's a long ballot, and so people a lot of times will go in and just vote yes because they'll read a title and it sounds good. As you see, like, for instance, the citizenship requirements vote is polling at about 72% right now. Raising minimum wage is polling right around 65%. All voters vote. That's the one. It's polling right at the level that it would have to pass, which is 60%. Our Constitution requires a 60% approval rate for an amendment to be passed. So 3 is right at that level right now. And like I said, with the groups coming against it, it has a battle ahead of it. I'm not saying it won't happen, but it has a campaign to run. And then finally, the voter approval of constitutional amendments is polling around 69%. Mainly, I believe, because of the title, because voters like to have control, and hearing voter approval of constitutional amendments gives voters sort of a sense of what that they're in control of the constitutional amendments. So that's sort of a quick look at what our amendments are. I'd love to talk about them more in detail if anyone wants to talk about them, but literally, it's the top 4 that are the ones that are really ones that we'll hear about. Like I said, an amendment doesn't get on the ballot without a group raising money and spending money to want us to put it out there for voters to hear. And we've seen that with the citizenship, the minimum wage, the all voters vote, and then the voter approval of constitutional amendments. So with that, I'd love to take any questions anyone has.
We will open it up for questions. Amanda's running the Zoom here for us. So Amanda, how do they indicate?
You guys can either go ahead and unmute yourselves or raise your hands or however.
The one that we had talked about in our public policy meeting, taking a position on, was the minimum wage. Was the one we talked most about. We'll certainly open it up to questions on any of the 6 amendments, particularly the top.
The minimum wage is especially concerning amendment to us. I've seen studies that show if it passes in the first 4 years, there would be hundreds of thousands of job losses in Florida. We know in other states the move to automation has been increased. In fact, here in Florida, John Morgan, his group they've selected a woman who's a fast food worker at McDonald's, who's 60 years old, who's on the minimum wage as their spokesperson, and she's exactly the person whose job would probably be lost. We see in other states where, McDonald's and other fast food restaurants have moved to automation where robots can flip a burger, or we all have seen kiosks. So the real concern is if this does happen, what it would do to the people that are, benefiting from it right now. It would drastically, we would see the move of automation and a lot of job losses.
And Andrew, it includes all wages, any job. This is part-time, teenagers. It's any job, correct?
Is any job, yes. And there's other concerns because we know many union contracts are adjusted to a certain amount above the minimum wage. So, it's essentially Pandora's box. You're opening up, and like we've seen, there's a worry of companies not seeing Florida as a hospitable environment. If we look at Seattle, where they've moved to the $15 minimum wage, or we look to Washington D.C. or New York City, we see where we've seen companies flee those areas, or maybe the outlying communities where it's a little bit, they can pay, a more, in their minds, a more reasonable wage and make, money. Because we know that once the minimum wage goes up, in every instance we've seen it, costs go up, the price of housing goes up, things like that. And we already have a problem in Florida with affordable housing, and so we just see this as exacerbating that and making it tougher for families.
So we're open for questions. Clinton, do you have a comment? I'd be shocked if you didn't have a comment at one of our meetings. Oh, and Daniel Whitehouse is up. So you're first, Clinton.
Yeah, you're getting picked on by the two most prominent members here. So we're having two arguments here. One is whether or not the $15 an hour or any minimum wage or anything dealing with financial or economic status in the state of Florida should be a constitutional amendment. And my take on that is no, it should not. However, our legislature has been less than apt at being able to successfully pass legislation. So therefore, the citizens get upset, get pissed off, and then they push it to be a constitutional amendment. And that's what happens. So there's something even deeper wrong in the legislative process in the state of Florida. But to address the minimum wage argument on itself, on its own merit, if this is legislation, we could be having this discussion. But I'm going to disagree with some of the things you've said. That's a mantra that I hear over and over and over again. And as a businessman, as an employer, I disagree with. And why I disagree with this is, number one, less than 1.7% of the people in the country of the United States right now are making minimum wage. That is down, by the way, from 13% to 79%. Secondly, no, there's not a job in this country, in this world. I can't think of a job in this world that I would pay somebody less than $10 an hour for. I have Dave's kid come over and replace my brown boards with white boards, and I'm going to pay him $20 an hour. It's just the way it is. The argument about it's going to displace workers or they're not going to come to the state, and look, you're talking about Seattle, a region, one little tiny city in a giant state, but you're also talking about a state of Florida who's the third largest populated state in the country, which, by the way, none of this is going to take away the opportunity that's available in the United States. This country has a successful means of opportunity. Everybody that works hard in this country makes it. And that opportunity is not going to disappear no matter what we set the minimum wage to. So we have that to contend with. The fact that, like I said, nobody's less than $10 an hour, it is incremented, but it's also, once it hits 15, it's based on the CPI. And that CPI is negative. The way I read, if you not the ballot verbiage, but the actual verbiage for the proposed constitutional amendment, if there's a negative CPI, then there's going to be a loss in revenue for those hourly wages. So you had made a statement that it's going to increase every year subsequently from that. That's not entirely true, because it's based on CPI. And then finally, there's another whole entire economic aspect that we need to look at this. The United States government has just exceeded, for the second time ever in the history of this country, the amount of federal debt has exceeded the amount of GDP, meaning that our debt is more money than we make. So if an average household makes $50,000, they are over $50,000 in debt. Now, I'm not scared about that. We went through that in World War II. Again, the economic stance of the United States is very strong. But in order to make that debt look small, and we probably are going to have a second wave of coronavirus, which means in order to sustain this economy and avoid what's happened in the UK and other well-developed countries where they're in recession from this, the only way to do that is we need to inflate. And the only way we're going to inflate is increase wages. So if you want to make that $26 trillion that we're in debt right now look really, really small, the best way to do that is over the course of years have inflation. And I will use the example, my father's first house in the 1970s was a $120,000 house. Now, if somebody told me I would have the house that we had for $120,000, I'd be kicking up all sorts of storms to make sure I can get that home. And so the cost of inflation has made this look really cheap, which is going to make that $26 trillion look really cheap. And the fastest way to do that is you increase wages. And it's not going to have any impact. I'm a business owner, and I'm telling you right now, at a $15 an hour minimum wage is going to have zero impact. Now, your other argument on this McDonald's and the automation, it's already happening. They already are automating this. It's already being handled. The matter of fact, most of the workers that you do through the drive-thrus at these fast food restaurants are in India already. They're not even in the States. When you talk to somebody ordering your food at a drive-thru, they're not even in the store you're ordering from. So that's just the cause of just the way that a transitioning of technology and a transitioning of economics, and we as a country are now getting into another method of which we're going to be successful in earning wages. And that is, as I said, if you would have said 20 years ago, somebody's going to be manufacturing iPhones, you would have looked at them like they were crazy. So the question is, what's going to be next in the next 20 years? And quite frankly, fast food, restaurant, drive-through workers is not on the radar. So that's all I had to say about that.
Thank you, Clinton. We're gonna go back to Andrew, and then we'll go to Daniel after that. So do you have anything you want to respond to that?
I guess, I see a lot of his concerns being valid, but I also would say what we would also see is not just fast food, but other restaurants. This doesn't have a qualifier like many of other had as far as from the tip culture from restaurant employees. The biggest concern I guess we have is the price being passed on to consumers right now. Right now, in a COVID environment, we've seen 1 million lost jobs in Florida, and this only exacerbates it. During an economic downtime. And like I said, when I talk about restaurants, we talk about going to not just a fast food, but going to your local restaurant where they would have to now pay their employees the full minimum wage on top of the tip. And there's concerns from restaurant groups and workers how this would affect our tip culture. So we believe, and a lot of others, the coalition we're in believe that this is really it's not the time for it, and it would have a bad impact on our economy.
Thank you, Andrew. We're going to go to you, Daniel.
Sure. So I raised it last week when we were discussing this and proposed that we, as a chamber, also oppose this. And I've got a few reasons for that. One has already been stated previously, and that is that do we really need a constitutional amendment for this? Should we be modifying our constitution for things that really should fall within the legislature? And I don't believe that a constitutional amendment is the way to accomplish this. Now, I'm not suggesting that we take a position that is against fair wages at all. However, I don't believe this from a constitutional standpoint is equivalent to what a fair wage should be. Whether the ratcheting up to 15 in 2026, 2027, whether that amount is going to be appropriate or not, we can't say right now in the year 2020. And to the point that was made regarding the current COVID climate, absolutely exacerbates it. And the other issues that places have seen, such as Seattle, is folks who were making minimum wage that immediately got that increase, which pushed them over the wage or the earnings limit for certain other benefits that they were receiving, government assistance, things of that nature. They stopped working so that they could continue on and receive government benefits. So there, not only do I believe we have a cost impact that is going to flow through to everyone who's making the purchases, but from a business standpoint, we will inevitably have workers who now want to work less because they are over that limit. And it's not going to be widespread. It's, you know, it's obviously in those companies in those areas where they're really only paying the minimum wage. To Clinton's point, yeah, who's, you know, I would assume that many of our chamber businesses are paying well above minimum wage already. But do we need at the state level a constitutional amendment to do this? Is this the right amount of money for our state when you look at some of those other jurisdictions who have implemented it, where the cost of living is substantially higher? And do we really need something at the state level, or should we let market forces drive what the employment wage should really be? So I re-propose that the chamber take opposition to this particular amendment. And I think we could come up with a statement that says that we're in support of a fair wage, but that we trust our business owners to establish what that fair wage is for their employees and their circumstances, without this heavy-handed approach that crams the wage down the throats.
Yeah, and to your last point, Daniel, that's what I hear most from small businesses. The exception that they have to these types of amendments are that market forces should you know, take care of the economy, and they don't need government interference and mandates is the problem. I think that a lot of the mom and pops that I've talked to, smaller businesses in our community, have a problem with.
I do appreciate that there's a ratcheting up to the 15, and it's not just, you know, January 1st. It goes from, you know, I think it's 8 and change now to 15, or maybe it's 9 and change, I don't know. But, you know, I do appreciate that fact, but we just don't know, sitting here today, whether 15 is the right number in 6 years from now.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. It is open for any questions or comments that anybody has. Is there anybody else who would, Pat Kelly, go ahead.
Hey, I just want some clarification, because I heard a couple of things, and so I'm still trying to process some of this. The concept of the $15 for tipped employees or people who get commission or stuff like that, because it's not just the restaurant workers, it's going to be your car salesman, it's going to be anybody. Can somebody please explain to me how that works? And then the negative CPI, which Clinton brought up, which I didn't really think about, does that mean 8 years from now, if something happens, we actually are going to be taking money away from people? I'm just trying to understand those two. If I can just get clarification, I would appreciate it.
Andrew, can you speak to that? We're unmuting you, Andrew. Go ahead, Andrew.
All right. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can.
I'm not 100% sure about commission-based employees, how that affects them. But looking back at the CPI, I'm looking for a negative, you know, negative factors don't happen that often. Looks like the average was around 2% per year if you go back for the last 10 to 15 years. So, you know, somewhere between 1.5 to 2% is what the normal CPI is. So there is a positive impact on what it does to wages every year. But as far as the commission, I'm not sure. I could check on that and get back to you guys and talk to, you know, talk to one of my policy advisors and see what they say and how it would affect commission employees.
So you're telling me the chamber made a position on something without knowing how it's going to affect all employees, and just looked at a specific subgroup of it? Because there is a lot of incentive-based employees here in Central Florida, and I'm not just looking at the Claremont. I'm thinking about how this impacts Central Florida as a whole, as being a tourism base. So
what I'll say is, reading the amendment, there's not a carve out in the amendment for commission-based employees. Okay, when you read the actual text of the amendment, what it does to our state constitution, there is not a carve out for any branch of employees. Traditionally, there has been in the past. There's not a carve out in this at all for any employee.
There is. It's stated right in the, like I said, the verbiage that you're getting on the amendment ballot is not the verbiage that's proposed on the Constitution. But there's an FLSA tip credit. So wage earners that are under tips will not be making minimum wage. It's stated right there. The last two sentences of the actual amendment state that.
So the question is, somebody who receives tips, is that different than somebody that receives incentives? So your AT&T cell phone seller who sells phones, and if they hit their gates, they get some type of incentive. So they're getting $10, and if they hit their gates, does that impact? Is that the same as tips or not?
Under FLSA, it's not the same currently, and typically those employees are above the minimum wage already, and that incentive is truly that. It's a bonus above and beyond whatever that minimum wage is. But under FLSA currently, you have to, with all regular compensation within that pay period, whether it's a weekly or 2-week period, whatever it is, that total compensation has to exceed the minimum wage, or you're under violation of FLSA.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have anybody else? Thank you, Pat. Anybody else want to?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mary Lou.
What about independent contractors?
Oh, we just lost him.
And we just lost
Andrew.
Andrew on the call. He's driving to Plant City from Tallahassee, and it looks like we lost him. We'll try to.
Does anybody in the group?
Yeah,
know the answer to
FLSA
that?
doesn't apply to independent contractors currently. So if you and I make a contract for me to do services, and I end up spending more time than is required, and for whatever reason I end up making less than minimum wage because it takes me longer as an independent contractor, then we've done this via contract, and that was my fault for entering into a bad contract. So there's the power of contract. But if you're doing it on like an hourly basis as an independent contractor, then it would need to exceed minimum wage. Depends on what type of an agreement we're talking about, right? So if you've got me on and you say come in and work 8 hours today, or every other day, or take this job, then that clearly we're going to enter into an agreement whereby it exceeds the minimum wage. But if we do like a fixed fee type arrangement, and you say you're going to pay me $1,000 to complete this task, then I have bore the risk of how long it's going to take me to complete that task.
Okay, because we have independent contractors, and in this industry, a lot of people want to get jobs doing caregiving because they like it, but a lot of people do it because it pays way more per hour than minimum wage, and it's just sad because the quality of work, where do you get to choose who gets paid more because of their quality? Now, I don't, the clients agree on the rate, but the problem is I see people coming into an industry that is in greater need as our population continues to age, and the quality of their work is different, and yet they want the same amount or more money. And I see this going to be happening in the other aspects of employees that are getting wage increases, but their quality of work may be sub. And how do you deal with that other than getting rid of them and replacing them?
All right, Andrew, I think you're back with us. It looks like we can't unmute you on our end. I believe if you do *6, you can unmute yourself, Andrew, on your phone. There we go. Okay, you're back with us, Andrew. The question was about contract workers, and I think we've covered that.
Yeah.
That we believe that contract workers are outside of this. And you'd agree with that, Andrew?
I'm sorry, can you hear me? You're breaking up.
Yes. If we just had a little discussion on contract workers, and we believe that contract workers would not be impacted at all by this amendment. Would you concur with that?
Right, that's right.
But
So, and I'd like to go back to the tip wage I was talking about earlier. He was correct. I did misspeak. The tip wage would be affected. It would raise it by about $1.50 per year. $1.50 the first year, every year thereafter that. So it would push the tip wage up to roughly I think $7 an hour this first year. Then it jumps to 8. Then it jumps to 9. Then it jumps to 10. Then by 2026, the tip wage would start at almost $12 an hour on top of it. So the tip wage is affected by it. It's just not affected the same way as the others.
So, but changing gears and kind of trying to understand this contractor piece and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this is taking the city's position of it. To keep costs down, we bring temporary labor in during the summer months for just small tasks done around here. So we go to the temp service, they pay their employees, $9 an hour. They bill us at $15 an hour and get tasks done. So basically that they're gonna have to pay their employees at these temp services $15 an hour, which now exacerbates my cost up to $22 an hour because they're carrying a 44% overhead. And I see Daniel shaking his head, yes.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of flowing through. So technically they are contract employees, but it does impact. And a lot of people use the temporary services around here or just in the area. So that I was just curious on that. But thanks for validating that, Daniel. So even if it's not just permanent employees, it affects temporary. So this is a wage for anybody, not just a permanent employee, for a temporary employee. The day workers' wage will now be $15 an hour for whatever task they do.
So most of those agencies, Pat, they're temporary workers to you because they're on,
Right.
You're contracting with the agency, but the agency is paying them as W-2 wages and withholding taxes and things of that nature.
I get that, but they're technically not, they still show up when they want to at that. They're on the payroll, but they don't have a technical schedule. And if they don't meet their schedule, they're fired. They're just pretty much on call. But okay.
That's right. Yeah, but most of those agencies withhold taxes and do those things.
Oh yeah,
as well.
that's why we do it, so we don't have to cover the workers' comp and that whole process.
Yep.
But it does downhill. Thanks.
It appears to me, if I could ask a question and make a statement, if this continues though with where we are right now, going through COVID and a lot of the businesses, how is this really going to affect our smaller businesses? Because I see this being a real challenge for a lot of smaller businesses that have gone through a challenge during a season, and some have closed their doors. And then others that have asked for to get loans or to get the money that's out there. I haven't done that because I choose not to when I don't need it. But others out there, it just seems like we're going to keep going into this bigger ball of inflation. What are we going to do about that?
You back with us, Andrew?
I'm sorry. I apologize again.
I'm really not. That was kind of a big question, Mary Lou. I'm not really sure if you're kind of putting that out there, looking for a specific answer. But
well, what can we do to keep the inflation from getting crazy after what we've been through?
I agree with the question, but I think we're just trying to find the positions now of the amendment pieces.
yeah.
So,
Well,
I mean, I think it's a great question, and it definitely warrants further exploration.
Okay, but
we have four
with the
amendments.
inflation, it is with the increase of the wages doing what they're doing in this day and time. Is that the best way to do it right now?
I think we're searching for, whether or not we're going to take a position on this particular. So I don't know. I think I understand your question, Mary Lou, but I don't know that we can really dissect that and get too far into that without taking up a large amount of time.
Well, the percentages that he stated are already in effect of what the percentage of voters are going to vote. If anybody that's a voter that isn't all informed about a lot of things goes to that and says, oh, they're going to increase it. Well, yeah, I would want to increase, because you're just thinking about your own paycheck.
So Yeah, so Dave, in the interest of time, I mean, we're having public policy meetings so we can present a stance for the chamber so the board can vote yes or no. These are going to be official statements of what the chamber is recommending to the members. And I do agree with Daniel that I don't think that the minimum wage should be an amendment. I'd like to second his movement, his proposal on the chamber take a stance that it not be, but we also support some sort of financial verbiage that was stated earlier. I'd like to put that in the letter, as well as I liked what Daniel had to say that businesses can, we feel that businesses, especially our membership, sets that tone already. I'd also like to propose on amendments 2 and 3 that we vote no. I would like to have a discussion, if we can, in the last 15 minutes, if everybody's okay with this, at least on amendment 4, because that addresses this exact problem, that there are too many amendments making it to the Florida Constitution. And the way I look at a constitution is the framework of an organization, or it's the framework of our government. So you look at it as the framing of your house, and then you build upon that. And if we continually keep changing it, it's going to collapse. It's not going to be structurally sound.
We need to take them one at a time, I believe, Clinton. So Daniel, you have a motion for opposing number 2.
Well,
Yes.
number 1 or 2, yeah,
Number
2.
Number 2 is minimum wage. Clinton, you are seconding that
With the
motion.
verbiage that Daniel stated, as to that we determine businesses can set the tone, and we are doing a very good job at that, and that we're not opposed to some sort of wage increase, just not as an amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right, and if we haven't heard, we'll check in with you by email, but that looks like a majority. So that passes there. Number 3, the all voters vote, which the Florida Chamber is opposed to. Clinton, are you going to put forward a motion for opposition of number 3?
Correct. Yes, I put forth.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, a second. Any discussion on that? So all in favor of opposition of number 3?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, it looks like that passes as well. You can also put, if you were unable to unmute yourself, you can put it in the chat for either one of those. So we have votes to oppose number 2, number 3, and then Clinton, go ahead with what you were going to say about ballot number 4, amendment.
So on
number
amendment 4, it's the voter approval for what can be put forth as an amendment. And I tend to agree, and I think Daniel, you might agree with me as well, just judging by what you said, that we have way too many amendments already on the Constitution. It's very easy to get in there. I know that Representative Jeff Brandes has put through legislation to eliminate the CRC, which is the Constitutional Review, because there was some discrepancy of what happened back in 2018. And I'd like to open this up for discussion, and I'd really like to hear what Andrew says. If this is a solid way of preventing, so what this requires you to do is have 2 cycles go through before it gets approved. So 60% of the voters have to approve it twice. So if the people of England had Brexit all over to do again, I think they probably would not have passed it. I see Daniel smiling. So it gives people a chance to wow, whoa, wait, what? Kind of thing. I like that idea, but I don't know if that's the solution. And Daniel, I'd really like to hear from you on that as well.
I have a question before we go down. I have a question before we go down there, right? So Daniel can explain to on this process, especially on the, ones that are not that go through legislative. If they pass once, are they automatically going to be put on the amendment the second time, or is there any vetting that they have to do to even make it back to the second time? Does it automatically put it in line, or is there anything that has to be done? It goes back through some type of process.
Do you want to speak? Okay, we'll go to Andrew on that. Andrew?
I'm sorry, once it's made that constitution by the signatory process and all the thresholds they need in all 27 congressional districts, they need to have a majority in 18 of them. It would be on the ballot again. They would not have to go through that process again.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we ask Andrew to comment further on number 4, do you want to ask the question or make a comment, Daniel?
To Clinton's point about whether this is the most effective way, I'm not so sure that it is the most effective way. To me, it screams as though, yeah, second bite at the apple to right our prior wrong, but it also screams to me as throwing more money at a problem a second time around to get people to vote the same way that they did the first time. And I do agree with the Brexit vote that it would come out differently the second time. I'm not convinced that this is the most effective way to accomplish a second round of review or some other form of validation on a constitutional amendment. I totally agree that one bite at the apple and throwing a ton of money at something is an easy way to get it passed. And I definitely don't think that's the right way to handle it. Just not sure this one is all that is the best and most efficient solution.
So with this, I'm still trying to process this second pass. So if it goes through, so hypothetically, if this is passed and we're in this world, we pass one of these amendments this election, it will come back around what election cycle? 2 more years before it's voted on the second time? Or is it 4 years? Or how does that cycle work?
Was it 90 days or 10 weeks? And another election that occurs, it's got to be the minimum. Was it 90 days or? Hang on, I can look up the exact. It's about 3 paragraphs.
It would be the next statewide election, which would be. It wouldn't be in effect this year. It would take effect after this election. But let's say if it was in effect now, an amendment that passed in 2020 would have to pass again in 2022.
Okay.
2 years. Okay.
So is it once it passes the first time, is it in effect until it's validated, or is it just placed on the back burner until it's validated the second time? So what that will do,
it does
though,
not take effect.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Please finish.
Oh, so no, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, obviously it would not take effect until it passes the second time. It's not considered effective until the second passage.
So what that does do is eliminate some of the amendments that come out that are just a knee-jerk reaction to things that are going on. And let things, and that goes back to your Brexit piece. Thank you.
Andrew, do I remember correctly that
oh,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, please, what now?
Do I remember correctly that the Florida Chamber was in support of this one?
Yes, because it helps. We believe it helps keep our Constitution cleaner. And what I was going to say is we've seen in Nevada and other states that does this. It doesn't affect progressive or conservative issues. It just makes voters rethink an issue. And we've seen progressive issues pass and conservative issues pass over second. But we've seen the number of amendments that pass go down because voters have time to contemplate it and think what the actual effect would be as attitudes may change. Think about some of the ones we put in our Constitution in the past. Our Constitution is muddled. It's got, we passed an amendment in 2018 that banned offshore drilling and vaping in the same amendment. So, it's just, there's a lot of things that are in there that voters may rethink. And we've seen it happen in some other states. So right now, we've got we passed a high-speed rail amendment in 2000, then came back in 2002 and removed it. So it's like, it would stop that from, groups putting in their Constitution, but could put some budgetary restraint on our legislature. It would make people rethink it or think about what the actual impact is on a multi-year basis.
And to that point about the second pass, is my line of thinking that the same groups that throw money at it the first time are, throwing equal or more money at it the second time to keep it?
Yes. The groups that ran the money the first time, because quite frankly, the groups that push these amendments benefit from these amendments. They're not citizen groups at all by any stretch of the imagination. They're billionaires or they're special interest groups that want to put something in the Constitution. And a lot of people, our amendments process is extremely easy compared to some other states.
So if I could give some statistics here. So I looked up this Nevada thing, which is the only state that has a 2-time pass requirement. Now, granted, since 1968, we've had 140 amendments proposed to the Florida Constitution. Nevada's only had 14. So 10% of the constitutional proposals. So one could argue that those were extremely, really valid. However, 85% of those 14 or 12 passed the second round. But again, you could argue those 14 were really sound required constitutional amendments compared to our 140. However, on average, and I'm looking at another interesting statistic about Florida, since 2006, the average for Florida has been 4 to 5 per election cycle, which is an alarming rate. So I think we all agree that this is too much. I'm not sure, and I don't, Daniel, I didn't really get a definitive from you, but I'm tending to think that the second ballot measure may not be the end all. And I think maybe perhaps if we look at, from my point of view, and we could propose this and maybe this could be our verbiage. I mean, really a 75% or 3/4, you're agreeing, Daniel?
That's what
Three-quarters
exactly what I
vote
was
of
thinking.
the
Yeah.
public, as opposed
And actually,
to
I was
60%.
just looking up Nevada to see what their percentage is for passage. You know, is it the 61 or 66? We're 61 in Florida, right?
So, but what you're going to do here is when you talked about the length of a ballot, we have 5 constitutional amendments on this ballot. That means that if going with that trend, that next time we'll have 10 because we'll have 5 new ones, and then we'll have 5 old ones. So by the time at the end of the day, you're going to have 2 pages of just second readings and first readings, and people are going to be like really frustrated. Is this the first one, the second one? And then it adversely impacts. Let's just take the ones that, to me, that we don't have a position on that are no-brainer. The extending the homestead exemption, that means that for 2 more years, these people cannot get their homestead exemption for good, valid reasons because it has to go through the second reading. So although it stops some of these fluffy ones, it actually could negatively impact some really good amendments that just fell through the cracks, and they're quick wins.
This would not affect amendments put on by the legislature.
Okay, thank you. That's huge. Thank you.
Yeah, because the argument's really the amendmentary process to vote on their issues, and so the amendments that the legislature has passed through by a supermajority would not be subjected to the same requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions, comments from anybody else? Kathy Judkins, I see you on here. I don't know if you want to make any comments. Pat Caracciolo. I guess at this time we could entertain. I'm not sure if we would like to take a position on this or leave it alone. But I guess I would put it out to the group that we could entertain any motion at this time.
I'd like to put go ahead.
I'm struggling with this one. I don't think it's the right answer, but it does seem better than what we have.
Well, I'm wondering if we should oppose it. I'm going to tell you right now, chances are it's going to get approved. I'd much rather take the high road on the stance, but I think my motion would be to oppose this and go back and say that we would be in favor of a 75% voter approval as opposed to 260%. If I've worded that right. And I'd like to open that for discussion. And again, Daniel, I'd like to hear your point of view, but that's my recommendation for a motion.
I would get behind that. I just don't know that, as you said, Clinton, it's probably going to pass. So, I mean, I would absolutely get behind what you said. I just don't know how effective we're going to be with our position.
Well,
I think the train left the station on this one. You can't go back. I agree with you, Clinton. It'd be great to go 75%, but that's rewriting the whole and it's already on there. So you're either for this or against it. And I mean, statistically, it looks like it's going to pass. And so if you can win the other three, is this the one that, because I mean, we could sit and have conversations all day and I could go back and forth like a tennis match on, yeah, I agree, I disagree, I agree, disagree.
Can I ask a question? Why are we not educating people on the accuracy of what an amendment means? People look at these. I remember when that pig one was out there. People will want to save pets or animals before they look at a lot of things, but they didn't understand the true meaning of what it was about. And that's why it went through. Why are we not educating? Instead of our commercials leaning towards people who pay to get their way, why don't we educate about what it actually?
I think we lost you there, Mary Lou.
I think her point was, you know, that we include some sort of educational component around what it means to be amending our Constitution. And I'm sure that
Actually is, and I believe that, well, even the specific amendments that are out there, that doesn't always show exactly what the meaning is unless you, like Clinton, were looking it up, and Daniel, you were looking it up. That doesn't mean everybody and their brother is looking up. Some people just vote because they like the name of somebody. So, I mean, we got to educate. It's our responsibility as the political leaders. I'm not saying I am one or work the way they do. It should be the responsibility of those that are in office to do the same thing.
Okay, so what do we want to do with this? There's some varying opinions. My concern is if we don't have a strong opinion, it kind of waters down the other things that we're trying to get behind in a strong way. And I'm always hesitant to take positions on things that we really can't impact. And I think Pat said accurately that the train has really left the station on this. But we can entertain any motion that the group would like to make on this.
Well, I'd like to jump on what Mary Lou said. I think it might not be a bad idea if we as a committee and the board votes on this, that the verbiage at the very top of before we get to what our positions are, is what our position is on constitutional amendments. I think that's, 2-3 sentences as to why we take constitutional amendments very seriously, and that a lot of things that are proposed in the history and we can actually put some statistics, 140 amendments since 1968, 5 to 6 an average per election cycle isn't a lot, and it's a lot, and it dilutes our Constitution, and that we take it seriously, so that now reinforces why the subsequent stances that we're taking. I think it really strengthens what we're saying. So I like what Mary Lou's idea was on that. And answer your question, Mary Lou, you can't control the masses if you don't keep them in the dark. So you want to keep them uneducated so you can control them. So, and then again, I'd like to go back, and I think, Dave, I understand the train's left the station, but I think, look, even if we know that it's going to pass, we're not running a popularity contest. And it seems to me that most of us are in disagreement with Amendment 4. We as a chamber say we do not support it. And regardless if it holds water or not, you've got to take a stance, and I don't want to dilute that either. And I see Daniel shaking his head. So
I want to make a statement. This is Kathy. I think whatever we do, once we decide on which items we are for or against, oppose or support, that once the board passes our suggestions, that we really educate the community like Mary Lou stated. Because if we don't educate everyone, just passing it by the board means what? Are we sharing it out? How are we sharing it? Our rationale to why we're opposed something, and really explain it in what Clinton and Daniel stated is going to be very key to educating the members of the chamber. And that's the important fact here, because like Pat said, these items are already on the ballot. We can't change the language, we can't do anything with it, but we can explain why we are for or against it. And we need to clearly state that so that everyone understands our position.
So Clinton, I believe that you had made a motion on this. Could you restate what your motion is for ballot item number 4?
So I think I've got two motions here. Number one is on Amendment 4. I think if I hear correctly, my motion is that we vote no, that we don't approve it. But the second motion is maybe just a preamble paragraph. Well, it's redundant. A preamble to our entire amendment statement as a chamber to the membership is that we take constitutional amendments very seriously, that they dilute our Constitution, maybe throw a statistic in there in a 3 sentences, nothing more, that 140 have been proposed since 1968, an average of 5 to 6 per election cycle appear on the ballot, and that's just too much. And that a lot of things that are constitutional amendments can be passed as and should be passed as legislation. So I have basically 2 motions on the table, I believe. One is a no on 4 and 2 is on the preamble.
Okay, let's take them one at a time. Let's do no opposition of ballot number 4.
The second with a caveat, similar to what we discussed on the minimum wage, that I think we are in support of stricter requirements to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, but we oppose this particular measure because we don't feel it's the most effective way to restrict or limit what gets on the ballot.
And I'll revise my motion to state what Daniel stated, so it's a full second.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? See no oppositions. Okay, that passes. And then your second motion, Clinton, as far as the preamble, do you want to state that?
Yeah. So I said it twice already. So yeah, preamble to
Wait,
all.
it changes every time though. I want to make sure we get good here.
No, it's the same. Again, 2 or 3 sentences basically stating our stance on constitutional amendments, that we take them seriously, that a lot of constitutional amendments can be put through as legislation, and that it dilutes our Constitution in doing so. And then again, cite some quick statistics, the 140 that have been passed since 1968, and the average of 5 to 6 that appear on the general election ballots every cycle.
Okay, thank you for the
And
motion.
somebody needs to look those statistics up to make sure I'm going off of
Okay.
things I've read.
I think
I
we
second, so long as Clinton drafts the preamble.
that's an excellent suggestion.
Really?
We have a
Who do I bill for that, Daniel?
motion, a second.
Kelly likes contract workers. You can bill it to Mineola.
There you go.
All in,
But at what rate? What rate? Less than $15 an hour.
I don't pay anybody less than 10. I'm going to tell you that right now. I can't even, again, think of a wage that's worth less than 10 an hour. But that's just me. And again, I like what somebody said about businesses set the cycle. Yeah, so I'll probably pay 15 an hour.
all right, so we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor of this motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes as well. So that takes us through. Is Andrew still with us? Andrew is still with us. Andrew, thank you for hanging in with us. Can you hear me, Andrew?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So that I think that concludes the business that we wanted to take up today. We want to take a more informed position on some of these amendments. But we want to turn it back over to you and see if you have any concluding words for us from the Florida Chamber.
Just that, we always tell everyone this is the most important election of our lifetime. In a COVID environment, this is the most important election because it's going to deal with how we deal with a budget shortfall next year. Is it erase taxes if certain people get in office? So it's just really, educating people, educating friends, educating other business owners, just how important the election is. And, more so locally than nationally, it's just extremely, extremely important as we dig out of this hole that we're in, and it's deep.
All right, well, we really appreciate you taking this call on the road this morning, Andrew, and joining us. It's been quite helpful. So with that, we have gone over our usual meeting time of an hour. So I think at this point, we're going to conclude. That's all the business that we came together for. But I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Amanda ahead of time for her drafting of the documents that we will bring to the executive committee and the board. But with maybe a little help from Daniel and Clinton. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate you joining us this morning. We'll talk soon.
Thanks all. Have a great day.